Wait for it. And we're live. So, yeah, here we go again. Another structured data webinar, courtesy of SEMrush. So today we're going to be talking about structured data for content marketing, whilst we let a few more people join. If you're in the chat, let us know where you're from and what you've been up to today. Seeing as Jono let me know, it's International Dance Day. So obviously I'm here with Jono and Martha. I'll let those guys introduce themselves, seeing as they do a better job than me. So over to you first, Martha.
Sure. My name is Martha Van Berkel, and I'm coming to you live from Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And I am the CEO and co-founder of Schema app. Over to you, Jono.
Nice, thank you. I'm Jono. I'm special ops at Yoast, where I run our R&D and product roadmap, and ostensibly own our Schema implementation, which I was thinking the other day might well be the broadest of its type across the web, which is pretty awesome. It's quite exciting.
That's it. And I can see we've got a few people from Poland, Ukraine, Istanbul, where else? Mexico. That's quite fun. Got some people out there. Orlando as well. That's good. California. So that's good. So yeah, as I said, today we're going to be talking about structured data for content marketing. And I know you guys have got some really interesting insights for us to help really educate people on what they could potentially be missing out on. So over to you, Martha, to get us started.
Sure. Let's dig in. And, I think what's going to be fun about this is, we're going to kind of start broadly and then get more and more specific. So, stay tuned. We're gonna kind of start at the very beginning. I always like to kind of double down on my introduction with my knowledge graph, sort of how I'm connected to other things on the web. And I actually grew up at Cisco. I spent 14 years there. I do have a technical background. I am, as I said, the co-founder of Schema, coming to you live from Canada. And I'm actually wishing it wasn't pouring rain here so that I could drive my 1965 Austin Healey Sprite that was actually driven by Kevin Bacon when he directed the movie Losing Chase that it was in. And I always like to start here because this is, again, grounding us in Schema Markup allows the search engines to do inferencing and also very specifically understand the relationships between things. And again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, when we talk about schema markup and structured data, in this context, we're actually talking about them interchangeably. I tend to prefer schema markup because it's more specific, and we're actually using it to introduce specificity, so that makes sense. And this is that SEO strategy that helps our content be understood so that we can stand out in search. And, what's so exciting about this is that, we're seeing Google continue to invest in this. I've been doing schema markup since about 2013, 2014. And it's really in these last couple of years that we're seeing sort of it accelerate. And when we look at the documentation updates over the last year, so March 2020 to this past March, 52% of those updates were with regards to structured data. And then we also saw between, original release in 2011 and then 16 releases from 2012 to 2019 of schema.org, the vocabulary we use in order to do structured data. 16 releases in 7 years, 12 releases in the last year. So if you don't believe me that it's accelerating, here's a great example of where we're really seeing that. And schema markup is code. And so today we're going to talk about, as content writers and as you think about content, how do you leverage this approach and kind of get out of the code and instead think about sort of elements of your content to really maximize it. And so I'm going to talk about 5 key areas, and then I'm going to hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Jono, and he's going to kind of build on this. But when we talk about content marketing, when we work with our customers, we're really trying to get them to start by thinking about what are those rich result opportunities for that piece of content? And if you, again, kind of think through those, there's lots of different ways that you can use. And rich results are when we get that added information. And I always call it standing out in search. And, there's how-to, there's FAQ, product, and the opportunities are expanding. Now, we've seen a huge investment in the product space. We're not talking about e-commerce, though, today, but shipping came out in the fall. Price drop came out. Price drop is really cool because if you already have offer markup on there, you're already eligible. So we love that, especially at Schema where we talk about future proofing. And then we also recently saw new practice problems in Math Solver. So as a parent who has my kids at home right now because they're not in school, now they can Google the answers. This is good, right? Now, the list that you want to think about. So if you're building a new page, any page, what I want you to do is actually think about going to developers.google.com and think about what rich result you might want to achieve with that content. And this is actually developers.google.com. And you can see here on the left is that long list. So some of the ones I just highlighted were around product and practice problems, but you can see here FAQ, event, article, which I know, Jono, you're going to kind of double click on. So all the long list is here. And I do encourage you to get familiar with this list, and not only familiar with, what are the different options, but within the actual documentation, it's then going to talk about required and recommended properties. Now, what I love about this is that if you're architecting a piece of content and you're like, awesome, I'm going to write this great piece about, I don't know, butter chicken. And there's going to be FAQs as part of it because that's the rich result I want to try to achieve with it. Maybe also recipe. Butter chicken's maybe a bad topic. I'm going to talk about bicycles. Going to do an FAQ on it. What are the things that are then required in order to achieve that rich result? And Google's giving you a list. So you can actually architect your content, then be like, okay, I want to include these things. This is for article. Some of these are like, duh. We need author, we need date published, we need headline and image. And so you can use this as a way to backwards architect your content. Now, the second resource you can use as you do your planning is the schema.org vocabulary. And the schema.org is something that was created way back in 2011. It's the one that we're seeing accelerated releases. And it's where we really describe all of the things you can describe and the properties within them. And so when you go there, it's got this, really basic looking schema.org headline. It sort of describes it. I always go to this release history link. But if you actually go in here and, click on getting started, or if you actually go into the schemas, you can start looking through the hierarchy. And these actually map to those rich result, classes that Google calls out, but in a lot more detail. And in fact, they include a ton more properties than Google's required and recommended. Now, I'm not saying go through this long list and include them in all of your content, but what I am saying is that the actual team looked at this and created, these are all the things we want to know about an article or about the different things. And so as you think about the content piece you're writing about, you can actually look to see what are all the properties about the things I'm trying to get, the intent and the specificity that I'm trying to articulate, and then actually go through the properties to see what, in addition to those required and recommended, you might want to include. And here on properties, same thing. What I love about product is, where color, depth, size, all those are really included. Now, again, don't use all the required and recommended. Don't use all the properties, but use them to inform your content. All right, everyone's still with me? So we're going to look at Google's documentation. We're going to go to schema.org when we think about the content we're writing. So we're thinking about those things that Google and the other search engines want to know. And then when we know those things, we want to also then make sure that we're connecting the dots. And so I want to talk a little bit about connected schema markup. And this is something that I think, Jono, you and I are super both passionate about this. It's sort of the semantics of the semantic web that comes into schema markup. But it's where you kind of define how things are related to one another. And these just so the product is that, that main topic or class that I just showed in schema.org. And then these smaller pieces are actually those properties I just showed, or the required and recommended that you saw in Google. And you could really connect anything. And so we have a free tool on schemaapp.com. If you go to the footer, you'll see it there called Schema Paths, or just Google Schema Paths. And this actually allows you to connect things together. So let me give you an example. So let's say you're actually creating your homepage and you want, you on your business site, you also want to sort of call out how you're building a product. So our organization has our product, our highlighter. How do I connect these together so that I make sure that Google understands, how these are related? And so when you actually put them in, the tool will tell you which properties to use. Now you have to go through here and use your brain, because it's okay, well, the organization owns the product. Well, yeah, they do own it, but it knows about, well, that's one's not strong enough. However, if we look at the reverse, the product has a brand. So that one might make sense if it's your brand. Has a category, it's not really strong enough. Oh, it's the manufacturer. So I like this property here. So I would actually create the relationship between my product and the organization, using that piece. And the reason I mention this is you can also use these relationships in order to connect multiple rich results. And what's really fun is I actually went in the Wayback Machine, Jono and Paul, for this one, because we've been doing ad IDs kind of built into Schema app for a long time because it allows us to kind of call out how things are connected. But Google updated their documentation in July 2020 to basically start saying like, yes, please link these things together so that we know. The example here, they said like, if a recipe has a video, we can show the video rich result, or we can show the recipe rich result. And so the connectedness, I guess my point here is, the connectedness isn't just so that you can have like a beautiful story that you're telling, but it's also because like Google will use it to understand relatedness and then award you those different rich results. All right, last piece, Wikidata and Wikipedia. So I love this because you can use Wikidata or Wikipedia to define concepts. And again, we're seeing a lot of the core updates talk about specificity. In fact, I was just doing a bunch of research on like the product reviews update that's just been made. And a lot of it's, like about, are we being specific about who the author is and what product we're talking about? And so Wikidata and Wikipedia, you can actually use to help bring those examples using some of those properties. So for example, if you were talking about Wembley Stadium and you want to be really specific about it, you could actually use the Wikipedia entry for Wembley Stadium as a same as, or here, the World Health Organization, we're defining that organization. Again, we could use that Wikipedia. Or let's say, like this is one of our case studies about our work with SAP. You could even use a property like mentions, which is a softer relationship, and also link to the definition here. We're mentioning SAP, and SAP has an entry here in Wikidata. And I often get asked the question is like Wikipedia or Wikidata better? So one is better than nothing. We do prefer Wikidata just because you see when there's like a Q definition here, it just means that it's language agnostic. So it's like the entity defined here, sort of not sort of published in different languages in Wikipedia overall. And the last piece is around strong connectors. And so when you're writing articles, especially like our content or any page, but specifically articles, I love these properties within schema.org that allow you to be, again, very specific, but also connect to different things. And you saw, I used mentions in my last example. So about this page is about this. Like, let's be really clear. Maybe it's, you're talking about a product and the product's described on another page, or you're talking about a person, a founder, and it's defined on another page. It's a really great, strong connector property. Mentions is another one, again, a softer relationship. So about, it's very clear this is about it, whereas if it mentions, you might have one or two things you mention there. And then subject of and has part are the opposite of each other. So, the example I would give here is like, if I was talking about that, maybe it's an article that is about my brand new, awesome, beautiful bike that I just got. I might say it's the subject of the FAQ on the page, where I then sort of have FAQ. Whereas if I had a page that was about FAQ and it has part, then it would be the opposite. All right. I like to give examples. I don't know about you, but like Friends came out when I was young. It was kind of a big deal. And Justin Bieber's Canadian. So what were the chances that I found an article about Justin Bieber and Friends? Google found it. So hilarious. So Justin Bieber's going to have a cameo in the Friends reunion. Did anyone know this? So I could say it's an article about Friends that mentions Justin Bieber. And then again, if I wanted to be totally nerdy, I could also do a subject of on FAQ. So there's my 15-minute blast on some kind of tips when you're doing content development and how you kind of pull it in. I am the CEO at Schema App. We're trusted by SEOs worldwide to do their schema markup at scale without IT and with expert service. And you can reach out to me directly if you have any questions. All right, John, over to you.
That was awesome. Really cool.
I think I had too much coffee though, because like I kind of blasting through. So lots of different pieces, right? And I think that, like I mentioned sort of when we were briefing for this, like I was talking to one of our customers and I was like, what value did you get from working with us? And I was just kind of trying to understand. And she's like, well, I thought I was getting like expert support and a technical solution. What I didn't know what I was getting was like how structured data was going to play a huge role in our content strategy. Her words, but it was like, yes. So if we can figure this out, right? And if your team can figure this out every time you're building out a content piece or thinking about architecting that new page that might be replicated across the board, backwards engineer, think about the rich result right at the beginning, and then bam, it's going to stand out right from the start.
It's the same kind of thinking that we've trained ourselves to put in around keyword research, right? You find
Same
your
thing.
audience and you look at the opportunity. It's the same thing. It's just a different format. I just wanted to connect two of the points you had, because I think this is really interesting. You talked about the importance of IDs and the importance of strong connections. I think you bring those together and suddenly you can start to say things like, this is a guide about a bicycle in an article written by a person who works for an organization who manufacture that bicycle. And that's
Absolutely.
quite a complex string to convey, but that you need to use the IDs to define those entities, and you need those strong connectors to define the relationships. That's how you win, really.
Yeah,
Very cool.
absolutely. And I think like if the content writers can at least think about what are those pieces you have to at least build into the content so that you have the opportunity then to make those connections is key, right? So it's about being kind of deliberate about it.
Absolutely. Right, let's share my screen. Martha, jump in on mine. I'm going to
I know I was waiting
start
for
off with
you
some
to like blast in there. I don't know if you were drinking a
had
cup
it.
of tea or something. I was like, all right, I'll jump in.
Nice. So I'm going to start off quite high level and then get down to some really technical, nerdy stuff with some specific examples. So let's see. Something I think we ought to look at and ask is, what on earth is the connection between content marketing and structured data? Because aside from the stuff that Martha's touched on, these feel like different things in different areas. I want to close that gap well and truly and for good, because I think these are the same thing. So let me talk you through this. Structured data is, as Martha went over, how we communicate with search engines and increasingly other systems. And increasingly, it's the main way we communicate with these systems. Yes, Google is still scraping our content and trying to understand it and make decisions, but increasingly they're relying on the stuff that we explicitly describe to them. This is a language and a way we communicate. Specifically, we're not just describing the things, but we're describing the relationships between them, as Martha explored, and those things live in our content, right? They're on our pages and in our articles. Describing the relationships between those helps us to manage how Google and search engines understand those things and their relationships. That understanding helps us to control the narrative. That is marketing. Describing the things, helping to manage the understanding, controlling the narrative, that is what marketing is. Structured data is content marketing, just mostly to and for the machines.
Booyah. Can we just like take pause here? Like you just like, yes.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's strong. We'll go with that. So, okay, what does that look like in practice? I've been playing. I took a week off over Christmas, which is maybe why we haven't done one of these in quite a while, and rebuilt my website. This is my flavor of content marketing. This is an article that I wrote on my website that positions me as an expert, reinforces my expertise, which I can, through a whole series of things, monetize to pay for a roof over my head, etc. That's not interesting. The interesting bit is what's behind it, which is this, which takes a little while to load. This is a description of that article. This is my content marketing. It's everything in that article. It's everything about that article, but it's also me as the author of that article, my areas of expertise, my website that it's hosted in, my address where I live, the comments on that article, the people who wrote those comments, the images in the page, and more and more and more and more. This isn't the easiest way to visualize that, though. So this is a tool called Classy Schema, which we've cited a lot. It's really, really great. This is what that looks like. This is that article and all of the relationships between all of the things on that page. And these use all sorts of strong connectors to describe all of those moving parts in a way that Google and Facebook and others can understand. Let's pull out some interesting bits. There is the actual article. And it's a blog posting, and you can see it nestled right in the middle of all these things that come and go to and from it. It has all of these properties and relationships with the people, the properties, the information. This is an image on the web page, which is also in that article. And you can see that connected in different ways using different types of connectors. And then we have all the people who've commented on that article. And some of those comments are related to other comments because they're nested within them. And some of those comments are by the same person who has an email address and a name. You can see how Google can start to understand these relationships between all of the things. Pretty awesome. And here you can see a whole bunch of peripheral stuff about the website itself, about me as a person. I think you can just about make out my wife at the top there, who also happens to work at Yoast, which is a company I work for. All of these things are related. Now, as Martha rightly pointed out, you shouldn't necessarily go to this level of depth. You don't need to put every property of everything on the page. But in the context of these articles, which I write, which are related to Yoast, it also makes sense to say, okay, and here's some other properties that are related to that, to tie it all together. What does that look like? I spent 2 or 3 days building this on top of the Yoast SEO API. So as I've rambled about loads before, Yoast SEO automatically outputs a load of schema, but we have a bunch of APIs that we can use to customize it. I am not the best PHP developer in the world, but I cobbled together some logic that you can see on the right that just says, in these contexts, add a whole bunch of extra properties. And I've just written those out and Yoast takes care of the legwork. That's pretty awesome. So let's get hands-on. There are a whole bunch of things that people don't do when it comes to content marketing, structured data, content-specific properties and optimization, including working out what the hell it is they're actually talking about, describing the comments and the relationship between comments and commenters, working out where on earth and how on earth you're meant to attach and reference images, understanding that content can be reviewed formally, which is quite interesting, looking at links, looking at potential things you can do on those pages, and looking at how on earth breadcrumbs are meant to work. So let's dive into some of those areas. This one is a real headache because none of these things quite work in the same way, and it's unclear what they should do, and the relationships between them is pretty complex. I should caveat by saying the right way to describe these and to pick which ones you use is to audit your site and your content and to make the right decisions. It's obviously not very helpful, and there isn't really a best practice guide. So Marty, you have opinions.
No, I was just saying, I was like, we should just do a whole session on like people voting what the page is about, right? And we could have them like vote. Okay, we like game show, Paul. You got that? Like we're gonna do a game show where it's like, what is this thing, right? Like I always used to say, it's the philosopher in us that has to ask, what is this thing, right? That we have to describe, and how do we then best describe it? And sometimes it is multiple things, right? So multi-type entities, which is something that we love to do, especially where it's appropriate. And I loved your comment, Jono, on just like, it's up to you to decide. And then I think that the key thing we always look at is like, try something and then iterate on it, right? So like if Google isn't seeing it and you're not getting the results you expect, try a different one, right? And we've done that with like hotels and resorts and small business and local business and web page and article, etc. Right? So it's I love there's a bit of art and science, right, where you get to pick.
Yeah, and there's so much philosophy to it. Right? I've gone back and tweaked bits of my markup so many times when I've slept on it and thought, actually, maybe it makes more sense to describe this thing in this way. I think there is maybe some general best practice you can steer towards as a starting place. So I think multi-typing your blog homepage as this is a web page and this is also my blog sometimes might make sense. But maybe your whole website is a blog and therefore you should multi-type your website. Again, like mileage will vary, but this sort of multi-typing is a really good way to shortcut. Your articles might also be blog postings, but they might also be more specific types. But again, describing these as multiple things makes this a lot easier. And then nice, strong connectors. If your blog is a separate thing from the blog postings and the articles, you want to be tying those connections back to it. What you absolutely need to do is ignore Google when they say, oh, don't describe the web page. It's obviously a web page, which they do all the time on Twitter, which is really annoying. The web page is a really important connector in these descriptions. It's often the thing that sits between the content and the people who publish it. This is an article written by a person on a web page published by an organization. That's quite a valuable piece of information that other things might relate into or out of. So yes, don't just put web page markup on, but think about all of these things and their relationships. Again, I love this concept of strong connectors from Martha. If you want to describe these things really robustly, the web page is an important piece of cementing that.
Can I chime in with just like a really specific example where multi-typing, I would say like makes absolute sense and where it also plays to get the rich result is think of some times where something is like a house. I love as the example where like a house is a product and a house because the house has a property. And one of the key reasons why you'll choose to multi-type is because you want to access all the properties on that second piece. So the reason we like product for house and product together, or a hotel room is also a product, is because you need to both describe the house with all their properties as well as the product with the price and availability. So I think like sometimes I think can be nuanced, whereas like there's some very specific ones out there where like it absolutely makes sense in order to do that. Now, I don't agree with your webpage piece, but that's why we have fun on these calls because we have different opinions. But like I think there's schema.org is so detailed that there's a way to describe it in more specificity than a web page. But again, this is the art and the science piece that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Okay, so I appreciate this is quite nerdy. Don't feel you have to go away and do all this immediately, but this is just an example of the kind of depth you can go to if you really want to describe all the things. I love comments. So many content management systems and pages don't output schema for comments. It's pretty straightforward. Comments are really rich. Comments have dates and content and authors. And when we talk about content marketing, like if you've got an article that a whole bunch of authoritative experts, for example, have commented on, you want to be demonstrating that. You want to say, oh, look, this expert in this field contributed this content to my article, and here is their name, and here is their URL. These are rich person entries in the same way that the author of the article might be. So it's really worth going into depth in describing individual commenters. And when you have the same person has made multiple comments, you don't want to be making 5 versions of those. You want to use IDs to say, actually, this was the same person with the same ID in each case. And then you can also describe the relationships between comments when they're nested. You can see in an example here, I've said the parent item to this comment is this other comment. And again, Google can understand that and can deconstruct all those relationships. This is really powerful. Images are a headache. So I have a blog post that contains some images. Where are those images? Are they in the article? Are they on the web page? Are they in the web page? Are they both of those? Are they something else entirely? The answer is none of those. And this is quite a hard concept to wrap your head around. That in graphs and in schema, things don't really have locations. They just have relationships with other things. So the image isn't in the article. The image just is. But then I can use strong connectors and strong descriptions to say which things it's in and it's related to. So we can say, this image is the primary image of this web page, and this article contains a list of images of which this is one. And we can start to build these relationships in a way that make more sense than just saying this web page has 12 images sort of associated with it. It's pretty powerful.
Jono, can I just chime in? Like, I think it was 2018 or 2019. Man, I'm losing track now over the years because I've been doing this for too long. Yeah. So bad. But like we saw Google, I'll say like lean into where images became a very important part of structured data. I think it was around early 2019, if I remember. And so like images are actually almost required for all the different types now. Yeah. And then this past December 2020, got that one right. John Mueller really called out that, you know, like they're going to see more visual search, that structured data is going to play a really big role there. And I just highlight those two things because like images are an important part of this. And when you're developing content, or even if you're thinking about a web page, like they want to see an image because the experience through Google is so visual, right? And so much about engaging.
Yep, and 2 other thoughts. One is that Bing are doing a ton of stuff with visual search. They had a big announcement in the last few weeks, lots of very, very fancy interfaces. And the other is that images can also be products. And there's a whole bunch of cool stuff around image licensing with metadata and where can you buy this and who's the original owner and all sorts of stuff. That stuff is hugely powerful, even just from copyright protection.
Okay, so here's like the super back machine. So I did a podcast with a gentleman from Microsoft who started schema.org, whose name I will remember at some point in this conversation. And when he and I were talking through it, what was so interesting was that he was, and this was, okay, so this like 2018, like a couple of years ago. He was basically saying, we are using structured data and entity connections to connect entities and images, which we see Bing doing a really great job of. And he was like, because we want to see how that ties into virtual reality over time. And so, and because they have like their internal knowledge graph, like they've been doing this for a lot of years. They're like very mature in this space. And so when we saw the lean in like the next year in images, I was like, oh, that's super interesting. Like, is that being driven by, you know, Microsoft and Bing being a stakeholder in this? Is Google catching up to them? So sorry, an aside, but kind of a cool kind of history piece on how these things come together. And I will figure that out and share it in the chat, who his name is. And again, it's a really interesting podcast that I did a bajillion years ago that's still super relevant.
Nice. No, that's big. I see anecdotally, we know that Bing's adoption of schema is a little bit limited, and that's frustration. But we know that Microsoft as distinct from Bing, is doing huge amounts of stuff and whole big chunks of Cortana and Windows Search and Microsoft's open source stuff and a whole bunch of their machine learning and AI, etc., etc., etc. All is deeply involved in using Schema. So even aside from the shiny Google rich results, it's worth looking at this sort of stuff.
Steve Macbeth. Okay, I didn't totally
well
forgot.
Nice.
There it is, and we'll share it in there so that people can listen to it.
Cool. Other stuff worth looking at, and we've mentioned this before in the context of trustworthiness. Trust is really important for Google. We know at the moment there's the whole EAT stuff where your expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness might influence how well you do. Human reviewers are assessing this kind of information. Trust is something you can convey with Schema in your content marketing. My slides have stopped working. There we go. Web pages have properties of last reviewed and reviewed by. A qualified human with experience, a person with a occupation and a alumni of property for which university they went to, and a works for property saying they work for a relative organization, could lend a lot of credence to the trustworthiness of your content. This stuff is hugely powerful. And we know, going back to Martha's point of kind of reverse engineering how you approach this, your content strategy people ought to be saying, you know what, in order to prove that our content is trustworthy, we should get an expert to review it. Oh, and we can describe that in the schema. And isn't that a really nice intersect? So this stuff is awesome.
Love this. This is like, and I think, health is a big topic right now, right? And so like, I think, if you're working anywhere around health, go re-listen to what Jono just said as the importance of calling out sort of, where your content is coming from, who's writing it and who's reviewing it. Because, in the latest release of Schema.org, they're leaning even more into health. And this just plays such an important role, especially sort of, what is the efficacy of like the work that you're doing and that you're reporting on.
Yeah, that's an interesting space to be in, and everything else is probably going to become more like that. They're starting at the dangerous edge, and they're going to move more into general search.
Yeah.
Related, linking out and citing stuff is a good way to validate your authority and expertise and trust, etc. Web pages have the same screenshot, slightly modified. Good work, optimized. Web pages can have related links and significant links. I don't think I've ever seen anybody use these in the wild, but conceptually, I think these are really interesting, especially the difference. This page has a whole bunch of significant links, which are valuable and relevant enough that I will call them out in my schema and say that they are useful context. Those might be references to a person who reviewed it. They might be an official resource. They might be a Wikipedia page. This proves that I've done my research and my thinking and that these pages acknowledge that they're connected to other sources of information and places. That sort of stuff is big. Okay, this I think is the most underutilized but potentially interesting thing in Schema, and it's a little bit underloved, but you might have noticed, and I think we've touched on this before, quite frequently in places like Gmail and Google Calendar, and even, I don't know where I was going there, but other areas, you'll see that you can take quick actions on content. So in emails, you can buy, you can respond, you can book flights. A lot of that is powered by Schema potential actions. And there are loads of these you can do. You can ask yourself, what can I do with this, or do to, or with this thing? And that thing might be the web page, it might be the blog content, it might be the product, but you can interact with that. You can describe those interactions. I'm doing it here. I'm saying that you can read this web page and you can comment on this blog post. There are actions that a user can take here which are related to these entities. And these sorts of things can be exposed in places like Google Search and Gmail and Google Calendar and stuff.
Assistant, yeah.
Google Assistant. This is huge for being able to do quick actions and voice controls. There are loads of these. It's worth going digging through the Schema stuff. But I think consume is really interesting because you don't just consume cake, you also consume content and videos. And there are subtypes of these like buy, watch, read. These are things that people can do to your content, and you can say, hey, this web page has 4 different actions that a person can take, and maybe third-party systems can shortcut that and access that. So those are really interesting.
I agree. This is underutilized. It's something that we love because most people don't use it. I think one thing to also remember is like when you're writing content, like often your goal is to get leads or to get someone to engage with you. These actions already exist on your pages, right? Just like your comment piece. So, it's a fun one.
Nice. And last up, I promise, because this is going to get boring if we just drill down through all of these, I wanted to talk about getting breadcrumbs right, because it's another thing that nobody does. And I think if we're talking about content marketing, the question of where this thing is quite relevant and important. Is this on my homepage? Is it buried 12 links deep in a blog archive? How do I get from this to other places on my site? Breadcrumbs are hugely powerful schema. Like, they expose directly in the search results. They're really helpful for crawling. They're really, really powerful. So you really need to think about the current page, the pages which are above and around it, and how you describe that. And my image hasn't faded in because I've messed up my transitions, but you can just about see here, I have a nice little chain saying, okay, this page has a hierarchy, that it's in a blog and in a category in that blog, and that blog's part of the site. But it also, you can just about make up, says that the deepest entry in that breadcrumb list, i.e. the current page, is the same thing as the web page entity that I'm on. I've used IDs to reference the same thing in both places. There's another reason why web page is quite a useful thing to have in the graph. I want to be able to say that this page in the breadcrumb is this page. And then Google can understand that that's not a separate version of this page, which is also in the breadcrumb. It's quite nuanced, but this sort of stuff is really worth looking at and interrogating. I think that's it. I should point out, otherwise I get told off if I don't point this out, but we've got a sale on at the moment at Yoast for Yoast Premium, but you don't need it because we do all this automatically and free and provide the APIs and stuff. But we do have a sale on at the moment, and we have a nice fancy integration with SEMrush or SEMrush or SEM SEMrush, whatever we're calling it nowadays. I lose track. But yeah, go and check that out. Otherwise, the commercial guys get very upset with me. But thank you very much. I think that's everything from me.
Right, so yeah, that's a lot to unpack there, isn't it, for everyone? So let's just answer a couple of questions, and then we move on to this next subject. So RJ has asked a question: how important is schema markup in the overall SEO landscape? So how do you guys see it? Obviously, it's really important. We know that, but in the bigger picture of things, I mean, how far? I think the question is, how far should you take it? There's lots that you can put in, but obviously that takes time. So is it a case that there's certain bits that you can do first and then grow on it, just like you were saying, Jono, where you go back, you edit it, you think about it, oh, actually, I'll tweak it a little bit. Or is it a case that you go in, you have to do everything at once? Yeah, I sort of added a bit to that question, but.
If you ask that question in a different way, so no, I'm thinking you wouldn't say that about billboards or TV advertising, right? You would say, because we understand that marketing needs to control the messaging and how people perceive our message and understand us, we should do that well. You wouldn't say, should I do 20% of a TV advert, or should I only solve 20% of my marketing messaging? You do as much as you need to control the messaging and to convey the information you want to convey. I think this isn't a huge amount of work, right? This isn't heavy engineering. This is expose some metadata with some structure and maybe use some awesome third-party tools like Schema app or Yoast to do the heavy lifting for you. It feels really strange that people approach this iteratively. Do as much as you can do that's worth doing, but don't start with the objective of doing as little as possible.
Yeah, I think it becomes an ROI question, right? Like, I don't have a business that focuses on structured data because it's like nice to do, right? It's because there's like hard numbers that come out of it. I think my team shared, like, look at the ROI of Sharp Healthcare. Like, we're talking 500% increase after we just like focused, our efforts in order to, have it stand out, get more engagement, get messaging out. So I would say like it's a strategy in your toolkit, and then you have to ask the question of like, where are you going to spend your time and effort? Are you going to hire an expert team to do it with extra technology, whether again it be one of our solutions or well, there's not really anyone else. We're the best, right? So but it is an iterative process, because like what we find, like when we engage with customers, and again, whether they're like a mid-sized business to like an SAP, right? Like we work with, mid to very large customers, it's sort of like, how do we optimize what exists today? So what opportunities exist today? Now, in my presentation, I talked about like, think about structured data when you're building content, but the fact is like a lot of content already exists today. And so part of it's like, I always ask the question of like, well, what's important for the business? Like, what's the 2021 focus? If you have to drive certain product engagement, or you're trying to really sort of increase your expertise awareness within the market, like you might say like, okay, we're going to focus on our blog content first. How do we get those to stand out? Which ones are ready for FAQ and how to, in addition to AMP an article? Which ones have videos in them that we should make sure we do? And we start there. And then you have to ask the question of like, well, what else is important to the business to be found and to stand out against our competition? And how do we then do the homework that we just shared with you to say like, well, what rich results should we have on this one? And, as your business changes, as your website evolves, it is that iterative process. And, it's why I have sort of ongoing engagements with my customers, because, as their business changes and evolves, we're teaching them those skills in order to how to do it, so that every single piece of content delivers the highest return on investment. And so again, structured data or SEO, right? It's like about like, what are the different tools in your toolkit to make sense to drive your business goals? So I would say like, that's like the key piece of like, why do you care? There's like, read that Sharp Healthcare case study. Like it's been ridiculous, the results we've been able to deliver, to the point where they're like, we should pay you more because like you're adding too much value, right? Good problem to have.
That's it. Just send a check. But yeah, so I think the other point that people need to take into account is if they're going to go back and keep revising it, is the fact that the first time that Google crawls it, it may not come back again for quite some time if you're leaving them to their own devices, so to say. But I mean, there's going to be a lag between when you update it and when it actually gets reindexed. And if the content hasn't really changed, it's only a bit of the code in the background, like the JSON, the schema. Are they really going to pick up on it as quickly as you want? So yeah, try from my point of view.
That button in Search Console, right? It's like, go back and relook at it, right?
Yeah, that's one way to do it. Yeah. But yeah, so we've got another question here. Does structured data have to match the page content perfectly, or can we include references for content outside of the page itself? I think you addressed over that as well, didn't you, Jono?
I did briefly. I guess so. The strict answer is no. You can do whatever you want in your structured data. However, the practical answer is various bits of Google's documentation require you to match what's on the page, specifically because they don't want you misrepresenting yourself. You don't want to say, I have 5-star reviews, and on the page you've got 3-star. And in fact, reviews they are particularly sensitive about. Anything around money they're going to check, or at the very least they're going to try and detect when it's not aligned. But the other half of the question was really interesting. Can we include references to outside content? Yeah, Martha talked about this. So you can definitely say, I'm talking about bicycles. Here is the Wikipedia page for bicycle, just to make sure we're talking about the same concept. You can cross-reference and externally reference all sorts of stuff, and that's a really good way of showing, clarifying what these things you're describing are. So generally try and match it, but you don't strictly need to, and there might be opportunities to go outside that.
My answer is different.
Excellent.
So I would say like the guidelines are very clear that it needs to represent what's on the page. And I agree though with Jono is saying that like you can clarify and add specificity through definitions, like that you don't have to have the Wikipedia link on the page, right? Or if you say like we serve the area of Toronto, you can then describe Toronto right in the same as, for that area served versus otherwise. But yeah, we would. Again, penalties are mostly like we see that review and rating content is, and again, this last change is sort of like leaning into that again. But I would say, yes, the intent is that your content evolves with your structured data.
That's it. And I think something that I'd like to add on top of that is you mentioned about and mentions, right? Now, obviously they're quite strong signals. So can you have more than one of each? Or is it best to be very specific and just choose the ones that are most relevant?
I think pick the ones that are most relevant. Like I think of sometimes where someone's like, I'm mentioning these 15 things. So it's like, well, then you have to ask the question of like, what is this page actually about? Like, what are the primary things that you're trying to talk about? And be like because if you're actually not being deliberate about those primary topics, I might question whether the page is specific enough, right? Because then you see, if you put on your Google hat, you're like, well, what page am I going to match when someone asks this specific question, right? So I think, again, that's as you journey in the sort of developing the content and then using the structured data, you can see how the two kind of help inform one another. Like, am I being specific enough if I want to like say that is about 5 things? Well, no, it should be about probably 1, maybe 2 things.
That's it. That's perfect. I think that's the problem that people ran into when the FAQ schema really first came out, was everyone was just marking it up with everything and then wondering why they were getting diluted on different queries.
Yeah, and FAQ has been an interesting, like up and down journey, I would say, like over the last year. Just, everyone got so excited, they deployed it everywhere. And then, like you shouldn't use it for marketing purposes now. We've seen them really pull back on that. But, I still really like FAQ, like done right and sort of with the intention of adding value and really answering those questions. I think one other area, someone asked me recently, like my thoughts on Speakable. This might be a fun one. And they're like, well, what about Speakable? And I was like, I don't know. It's like been years since like we really leaned into Speakable. And, that was 2018. And then in 2019, man, I'm a dictionary of like markup events today. It's like I'm showing my age in doing this. But in 2019, when they announced at Google I/O around sort of how to and FAQ, if you actually think about it, it's a little bit like, they're asking us to structure things for question and answers or, how to's, which a lot of what we interact with in voice. So I haven't been sort of, I'll say, like we can do Speakable and so forth, but I haven't seen like the necessity to do that to get great results based on the other things that are available today.
Yeah, it's still in beta. It feels like it will get deprecated in favor of just how to and stuff.
Yeah,
And like
I think so too.
The mechanisms for describing which bits of the page are speakable were really clunky as well, and they've not fixed that. So I think it's a dead end, which makes me really sad because it could have been quite cool. But
although I like the whole XPath calling out only because like that's something we do really well. So part of me was like, sweet, let's do this.
Yeah, I want that on everything. Like, I want to be able to say this is the content of this article via a CSS selector, but no, can't do that.
Well, Jono, just call me, please. Like,
use Schema on Yoast. So Jake Harding's got a question. Any tips on identifying schema in the source code of a page, particularly in respect of Chrome? I know there's some very good Chrome extensions. I think it's a little bit harder to, well, if you know what you're looking at, like the images that you showed earlier, Jono, then you can probably understand it. But yeah, have you guys got any tips or tools that you use within Chrome to analyze structured data?
I'm still like a total sucker for structured data testing tool, and like call me old school. Although like it's April 29th, like weren't they supposed to move that into schema.org? I was actually like hounding a little bit of that data today. So I like structured data testing tool. Again, there are some other like free plugins that allow you to view it. I want to say like even SEO Clarity or one of those have like something out that you can kind of view it. But I like structured data testing tool because it's going to give you like the entity buckets. You can click on it. You can look at sort of which line it's on, and so forth. And I like it. And part of the reason why it's moving to schema.org is it sort of pulls in that nesting and relationship piece. So both Jono and I talked about like the importance of looking at it in this connected way. And so as you look at it, it allows you to do that. And that's like, I would say like the gap, the structured data testing tool, it's not being deprecated anymore, Wes Waltz. We wrote a giant memo like from Schema app and I sent it to Guha and Dan Berkel at Google to say, I know you know that we do this every day, all day. Like this is what we would like to see in the rich result test tool if you get rid of structured data testing tools. So we like to think that we help them, but it's going to move under schema.org, which is great because that's like the collaborative group that manages the vocabulary. And that's really like truly semantic, right? So it is really the semantic view of the data. So it's still there, it's still working, and it's going to continue to exist. And I think I still like it as like the best tool to view things like just page by page. Again, there's analyzers that do a better job sort of looking at scale if you want to see it at scale.
Yeah, so yeah, I like to use SEO info because it's on the page, but sometimes it does glitch out a bit. So whoever owns that, just fix it a little bit for us. But it is a good little extension, that one. So obviously we're coming towards the end, and I know there's been a lot of new stuff that's gone on as well. So I don't know if there's any new pending types that people should be interested in around schema.org related to content, ideally, but anything else would be great as well.
I don't know. You want to go first? You want me to go first?
You go first. I'm just frantically skimming the release history to see if I can spot anything interesting.
I have a slide. Like this is like my world. Here, let me show this. Where did we go? So there's 12 came out quite recently, the beginning of March, and what's I say interesting about release 11 and release 12 of schema.org is it's mostly pending, right? So, and a lot in the area of products and a lot in the area of health. So in version 11, which I'm not showing here, but if you actually look into it, there was quite a lot around pricing specifically for products. And if you go to GitHub and actually look, it's actually Google Shopping who's driving these changes in order to get into pending. And by the way, hint, if things are in pending and submitted by Google, they're often supported before the rich result is announced. And so whether you're writing your markup or you use pending within Schema app, like that's something that's really great. But and again, like the focus in 12, what I'm seeing is again sort of a focus in on health and also on products. So products kind of easier to give the updates around like size enumerations, and think of enumerations are like different things that you can pick as sort of a download. Size is interesting because it ties to shipping, which we saw as the update in the fall. So again, like the world right now is in like e-commerce world and during a global pandemic. So I'm not surprised that these are areas that they're leaning into. We're super excited about health. We do a lot of work with healthcare organizations and networks, specifically in the US. And what's interesting about the health related content that plays a little bit, Jono, to what you and I spoke about before about specificity and understanding relationships is they're actually talking about how you can elaborate on, what is making up your health related content. And so they talk about everything from, like what is it about the treatment, or is it about self-care, or are you talking about side effects? And so in healthschema.org, there's quite a lot of ways to describe these things. And now they're actually adding more ways to almost like describe the parts within a health article or health content. So not surprised to see that these are the two areas that we're seeing. I think, again, the key takeaway is a lot of these are sitting in pending. We haven't seen a ton come out as part of core updates. And all you need to know for those listening is that, pending means that they're sort of agreed to in principle, but they haven't been like finalized. And if you want to get super dorky, I think we showed this in a previous show where like you can get into GitHub and have a look at who's talking about what and even chime in. It's an open collaborative community. We're super excited, again, sort of with our focus on healthcare and e-commerce, like that those are two areas that will continue to kind of future-proof also the markup with some of our existing clients.
Nice. The only bit I wanted to add wasn't in the pending stuff at all. It's just the changes Google recently made to video search results with all the clips. Clip schema has been around for a while, but not really exposed at the level it's being now. Now you really want to be hosting on one of the platforms that Google has made that available to, which is essentially YouTube. Maybe some more in the future. It gets political if you start digging too deeply into that. But yeah, take advantage of that. Like being able to let people get specifically to individual parts of your video that answer their specific queries is hugely powerful. It's a good branding opportunity. Martha's just dropped off the video.
Yeah,
that's
I'm
sad.
sure she'll be back.
That's really sad because I've just run out of things to say as well. So
well, the thing is, literally just before this, I was on a call with a client and we were just talking about the clip section. Now, nice. I think the thing that's actually funny about that is the fact that, it's obviously YouTube sort of like primarily, but the thing is, you need to put the structured data on a page, but then when you link on that enhanced feature at the top, it takes you to YouTube.
Yep.
So that's the bit that I find interesting is that it's on YouTube, but you need to embed it on a page so that you can have the video schema and get all of that clip elements within there to then send them to YouTube and not get rewarded as the page almost. So it's like,
and this ties to the talk we were talking. Sorry, I'm so excited to share something that I put it in the wrong window. But this ties to the image work that we were talking about, right? So if images are describing entities, clips are shortened versions of videos that are made up of images that talk about entities. So where are we going to see this all go in the future is, back to my conversation with Steve Macbeth in, 2017, like how do we actually like take all these visual elements and start understanding the things that are amongst them to be able to pull that down. And what I got so excited that I closed the wrong window was, Google's making these updates regularly. And so I just had the team share like the latest documentation updates from Google. So this is where on I think they're running it like 4 or 5 months. So it actually does go away after time, but they're showing sort of like nuanced updates. So again, to like, do you do schema markup once and then stop looking at it? Answer's no, because as these updates come up, you want to make sure that you're then like, again, tweaking the markup, in order to make sure that you're sort of still following best practices, still able to achieve that rich result, and therefore, again, show the ROI.
That's brilliant.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just say, Paul, I thought your point on the relationship between the page your thing is on and then YouTube extracting it and resurfacing it in their ecosystem is really interesting. That's my site as a data source that powers a third-party system. And at the moment, that's really just Google and YouTube. But this is the real power of Schema, that third-party things can consume and digest this information and do stuff with it in a way that would be really hard for anyone other than Google to do. So that's cool.
Amazing. Like, this is sort of my whole piece of like at what point, like, as we talk about AI and chatbots and so forth, like, are we going to crawl the graph, right? Like, and like, we're semantic dorks at Schema App, really. Like, like, we build knowledge graphs for a living, and it just happens to be in the language of structured data. But like, the intent that you can export that and reuse it is something we're super passionate about, and we've been starting to explore like how you do that with analytics, like what kind of insights you get out of that. Like, that's where we're excited about where this could take you, because anyone can consume it, right? So, and we think about how we interact with all of these different devices and apps. It's like just like an API machine language, right? Like that's all that it is.
Hell yeah.
That's it. John Doe's asked an interesting question, which I know we've got 5 minutes, so let's just hit a couple of these up. I'm actually trying hard to find a website that mostly leave there it is there. So that's much better. Trying to find leveraging schema.org for financial institutions in order to improve semantic connections between pages. Do you have any ideas or a guess? I think I know where this is going to go, but I'll let you guys get to it.
So yes, so I have seen financial institutions be lagging in adoption, and but they are using it, and I think one of the ways to think about, like, so there's specific financial schema where you're talking about credit cards, loans, and so forth, but there's also a lot of information on financial institutions that tie to like content you see even on like a SaaS company or sort of on other types of businesses. So you still have FAQs that you're trying to answer for your customers. You're trying to talk about products or services that you offer. And then sort of relate them together. And we talked about multi-type entities, like in financials, there's some interesting ways to do that. And if you want to reach out to me, Jim, like my contact information are on Twitter, I'm happy to kind of delve into that a bit more with you.
Yeah, I know I've heard of a specific financial type of structured data, which I think this leads into, which is what is it now? FIBO, I believe it is.
So FIBO was rolled into schema.org. So it's all just part of the primary vocabulary now.
There we go. So that answers that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at like credit card and loan. Like there's a bunch in there that are really specific, but then a lot of them goes back to the principle of what I talked about at the very beginning, which is like, what is the page about? What rich result can you get for it? And I would say there's a huge opportunity in the financial space to differentiate yourself with structured data because the big banks are moving slower to adopt it.
And most of these things are products, right? And also services, and therefore liable to be exposed in interesting places in Google. I was just digging through like interest rates and bank accounts and collateral. All these things are concepts. And then also there was some interesting stuff recently in some of the pending product and offer markup where you can do scheduled payments and recurring payments and payments.
Those are the pricing updates.
Yeah, so all of this combined is a really interesting way of describing things like credit card products.
Yeah, the pricing update, I think we talked about that in like the e-commerce version that we did, where like the pricing updates are talking about different ways to pay. And that plays really interesting into the whole mortgage space, et cetera.
That's it. So there's a question there about using both Schema app and Yoast.
Nice.
I'm a dental clinic. There we go. I'm a dental clinic and I use both Yoast and Schema app. Wondering, will it make a confusion? So, perfect two people to ask. So
the answer is it depends on how you're using it, right? Like, like we use Yoast actually for all our SEO because we love your plugin, and and we think it's a great way, a great process to kind of teach people on how to do it. And then you can choose whether like Schema app has a WordPress plugin too. So are you going to use Yoast Schema app? Yoast plugin for doing your blog markup or web page markup, or a Schema app. Again, different approaches. We look at articles as primary pages versus web page. Again, just different ways of sort of articulating what things are about. And then again, do you want to use APIs to do specific markup, which is what Yoast allows you to do, or do you want to use Schema apps, sort of software as a service, in order to answer it? Or if you're a bigger client, then you would also use our highlighter and customer success team to help you do that. So I would say no, it's just really a matter of where you want to use them and which approach you want to take. We work together. It's dancing day, right?
It is
together, right?
Nice. Yeah, we do. No, nothing to add. That's awesome.
That's super. Yeah, so that's the top of the hour for us. Obviously, we've got more of these coming up. We were just speaking about it this week. So if you're watching and you want to listen more about more advanced structured data like we talk about, then obviously keep your ear to the ground. There is more coming in June and July, I believe, but we're going to finalise those dates. So that would be great. And again, thank you for Semrush for putting this on.
Yes,
and
thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Martha and Jono.
All right, we got dance out, everybody. Dance out.
Yeah, everybody in the comments.
These are these are bad moves. Bad moves. We just go off, right?
Yeah.
See you later.